So there are many celebrations in Israel. We have all these fantastic feast days, and here we have a chapter dealing with them. Deuteronomy 16:1. Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover to the Lord your God. For in the month of Abib, the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. The Passover is probably the most iconic feast that the Israelite has. It is a celebration in memory of that event, the event in which the angel of the Lord flew over top of Egypt and slew all the firstborn. The Israelites' firstborn were protected by the blood sacrifice of the lamb. So in some ways, this is a celebration of that event. But it is also an event pointing towards the future, when another blood sacrifice would defeat sin and rebuild the ability for people to have a relationship with the Lord God. Deuteronomy 16:2. You shall offer the Passover sacrifice to the Lord your God from the flock or the herd, in the place where the Lord will choose to make his name and his presence dwell. So we see some of the restrictions here when it comes to the Passover celebration. That the animals to be offered in it need to be from the flock or the herd. They can't be wild game or anything else exotic. And we see here as well that it needs to be done in the location that God is dwelling. So that would be the tabernacle, and later on that would be the temple. So this would be an event in which the people of Israel would come together to celebrate the Passover event. Everybody coming home, and it would be like a festival, just a large-scale celebration. Deuteronomy 16:3. You shall eat no leavened bread with it. For 7 days you shall eat it with unleavened bread, the bread of affliction. For you fled from the land of Egypt in haste, that all the days of your life you may earnestly remember the day when you came out of Egypt. So there are multiple dimensions when it comes to the leaven of the bread. First, we have the historical. Back when the Israelites were leaving Egypt, they were in a hurry. They didn't have time to prepare. So they took the dough that they had and they went running. And of course the dough didn't have the leaven in it, so then when they were eating their bread, they baked it on the fire presumably, and it was probably more like crackers because there was nothing to leaven the bread. Although I guess crackers have leaven in them, so it would be like unleavened crackers, so just kind of toasted flour or wheat or whatever form of grain it was that they were using down in Egypt, the breadbasket of the world. The other aspect when it comes to the leaven of the bread is the little leaven leavened the whole lump. So if you took a bunch of dough and then added a little bit of sourdough starter to it, over time it will permeate through the entire dough and then the whole thing will rise. And that's the little leaven leavens the whole lump. And it's the same with the corruption, that a little bit of corruption permeates and corrupts the whole thing. So it's a very symbolic thing as well. So beyond the physical, historical context of them leaving Egypt, there is also the symbolic context with the corruption or the sin or the iniquity that a little bit spreads, and it is something that is undesired. A good example would be Adam and Eve when they were having a good time in the Garden of Eden. And the serpent came to the woman and he sowed a little seed of discord, a little bit of discontent. And it permeated through her body and she consumed the fruit. And then she shared it with her husband and he consumed it as well. So it was something small and it grew and it festered and it led to them being removed from the Garden of Eden and many other things that suck in our current world and environment. So it's not an insignificant thing. The little things can become big things. We see it mentioned here that it is the bread of affliction that they are eating. So this is not going to be the best tasting bread imaginable. Maybe it was seasoned in such a way that it was a little bit bitter, a little bit harsh. So they would be eating this type of bread during this type of event, remembering the journey of their ancestors as they left Egypt. Deuteronomy 16:4. No leaven shall be seen with you in all your territory for 7 days, nor shall any of the flesh which you sacrificed the first day at evening be left all night until the morning. So at the time of this festival, this celebration, this holiday, this holy day, no one is allowed to be eating the leavened bread. Everybody that is eating bread must eat the bread of affliction. And we see that there is a duration here, that it is for 7 days. 7, of course, is the number of completion. So we have an entire week where they're eating this bread of affliction. Should also mention here that in Hebrew and in the Bible, the days start in evening and they end at evening, right? So when the sun goes down, that's the beginning of the new day. When the sun goes down again, that's the end of the day and the start of the next one. Kind of the opposite of the way that we typically do things here in the Western world, where we associate the morning with the new day. Deuteronomy 16:5. You may not offer the Passover sacrifice within any of your towns, which the Lord your God gives you. This is the second time we've seen this so far within this chapter. It's in other locations as well. But when it comes to the Passover, it needs to be done in the presence of the Lord. They need to go to where the Lord is to make this sacrifice, to make this offering, for it to be valid. There's no substitution here. They're not able to just go willy-nilly to and fro. It needs to be in the location of the Lord. Deuteronomy 16:6. But at the place which the Lord your God will choose, in which to make his name and his presence dwell, there you shall offer the Passover sacrifice in the evening at sunset, at the season that you came out of Egypt. Of course, the location here is mentioned yet again, but beyond that, we see some of the more fine-tuning details. We already knew which month it was to take place in, but now we have the time of day. At the evening, at sunset, so right as the beginning of the new day is when they make this celebration. Similar to the way that we celebrate New Year's Eve, and we have the countdown timer to when the next year starts. Here they would have the countdown till the sun goes down, and then the Passover sacrifice is slain. And then they cook the meat, and then they consume the meat, and it's just a fabulous occasion. I wonder if some of this was symbolic, like when the people of Israel were in Egypt, and they were waiting for the Passover event. They knew the Lord was going to do something. They didn't know exactly how it was going to go down, but they knew that there was going to be a time when they had to leave. They had to be prepared to get out of Dodge, to make the Exodus. I'm sure the people of Israel, they heard screams, wailing and moaning as the people discovered their firstborns slain. And in the time of the intense grief, they made their escape. So the Passover is an event that precedes something incredible. And later on, there's a Passover in which a man is killed and executed by the method of crucifixion. And afterwards, sin is defeated. Deuteronomy 16:7. And you shall roast or boil and eat it in the place which the Lord your God will choose. And in the morning you shall turn and go to your tents. So the sacrifice is made. The animal is slain. Then they are cooking the animal. And when the animal is finished its cooking process, they consume the animal. And they're going to be at it all night. I'm sure this makes for one amazing party. Deuteronomy 16:8. For 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a solemn assembly to the Lord your God. You shall do no work on it. Immediately following the Passover event, we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is done in remembrance to the event when they left Egypt, and they didn't have time to prepare. They didn't have time to add the leaven to the bread, or the dough to make the bread, so they were forced to eat unleavened bread. So this is a celebration or a remembrance of that time when they first left Egypt underprepared, under the guidance of the Lord. Combined with the Passover, this means that for 7 days they're not going to be eating any leavened bread. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is not a happy, joyous, exciting time. It is a much more somber and reflective time. And here at the end, at the last day of the celebration, they have an assembly. And to make sure everybody goes to the assembly, it is also a no work day, a holiday. Deuteronomy 16:9. You shall count 7 weeks. Begin to number the 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain. 16:10. Then you shall keep the Feast of Weeks to the Lord your God with a tribute of a freewill offering from your hand, which you shall give to the Lord your God, as the Lord your God blesses you. So this is the next celebration. This is the Feast of Weeks. And this is also where we get Pentecost from, because it occurs 50 days afterwards. The word Pentecost comes from the Greek that literally means 50th day. So the Feast of Weeks is essentially a form of harvest celebration. It's happening 50 days after the previous celebration, and they're starting to bring the stuff in off the field, and there's just a great big party going on, and people are giving offerings to the Lord, and it's just a glorious event. Deuteronomy 16:11. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son and daughter, your manservant and maidservant, and the Levite who is within your towns, the stranger or temporary resident, the fatherless and the widow, who are among you, at the place in which the Lord your God chooses to make his name and his presence dwell. 16:12. And you shall earnestly remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall be watchful and obey these statutes. This is a great celebration, and as we see here from the list of people involved, everybody's participating. It is just a wonderful time, and they are celebrating the freedom from bondage in Egypt. How cool is that? Deuteronomy 16:13. You shall observe the Feast of Tabernacles, or Booths, for 7 days after you have gathered in from your thrashing floor and wine vat. So this is the third of the yearly feasts that the Israelites were to observe. The first being Passover, the second being Pentecost, and the third is the Tabernacles. This is also another week-long celebration. This feast is quite interesting because it's a celebration of the time when they did not have a place to call home, when they were out dwelling in tents. So in this feast, in this celebration, they dwell in tents to remember that time when they were out there wandering around for years before entering into the promised land. Deuteronomy 16:14. You shall rejoice in your feast, you, your son and daughter, your manservant and maidservant, the Levite, the transcendent, and the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, who are within your towns. 16:15 For 7 days you shall keep a solemn feast to the Lord your God in the place which the Lord chooses, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands, so that you will be altogether joyful. 16:16 3 times a year shall all your males appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, at the feast of unleavened bread, at the feast of weeks, and at the feast of tabernacles or booths. They shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. So the men of Israel, they are required to observe these different feasts, and they are not to go empty-handed to these feasts. And previously in other chapters, we saw different options for things to be offered to the Lord, and there was often a more economical option. So those that were less fortunate were still able to participate and still able to give to the Lord, even if they didn't have a lot. And we saw in another previous chapter that if someone was too far away, that they could sell what they were going to offer, and then when they get to the area that the Lord is dwelling, they could purchase something and then offer it then. So there was a lot of different options available for this type of event. But the big thing, the important thing, was their attendance. God wanted Israel to participate in these different feasts. God wanted to have a relationship with Israel. He wanted to be their God, and he wanted them to be his people. Deuteronomy 16:17 Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. I would not be surprised if these different feasts were the high point of the year and the thing that everybody looked forward to, from the rich to the poor. Just this great, wonderful occasion. Well, different occasions. We got 3 of them. Everybody goes to see the Lord. Everybody's together, and it's just a great celebration. Deuteronomy 16:18 You shall appoint judges and officers in all your towns, which the Lord your God gives you, according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. So now we are changing gears and looking at something completely different. For the last 40 years, Israel has been gathered around the tabernacle and moving as a group. But once they get into the land and possess the land, they're going to spread out. And as a result, the justice system needs to be updated for the new land that they will possess. So there needs to be officers and judges all over the place so that if an event occurs, justice can be done. So each tribe is going to have different leaders and judges that will be able to do things, and they're going to be in the different cities and towns so that there will be law and there will be order. And when somebody is wronged, things can be made right, just as the Lord has outlined in his law previously. Deuteronomy 16:19 You shall not misinterpret or misapply judgment. You shall not be partial or take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. The judges need to be a particular way for justice to be served. They cannot be partial to a given party, for that would give them bias, and maybe they would lean one way or another to the detriment or the perversion of the law. If the judge was to accept a gift or a bribe, it would also pervert the law, and that's no good either. There's a certain amount of integrity that is required for a judge to be effective and good and righteous. And that's what God wants here in Israel. He wants good judges that are fair, understanding, unbiased, and immune to the corruption of filthy lucre. Deuteronomy 16:20. Follow what is altogether just, uncompromisingly righteous, that you may live and inherit the land which the Lord your God gives you. It's to the benefit of the Israelites that they receive the law from the Lord. And if they follow it, and if they are righteous, they're going to have a good time in this land. But when they start compromising, it's just not going to end well. Deuteronomy 16:21. You shall not plant for yourselves any kind of tree dedicated to the goddess Asherah, besides the altar of the Lord your God, which you shall make. So Asherah is one of the goddesses of the local Canaanite people. And of course, the Israelites are forbidden from worshiping her because they are to worship the Lord God. And there's multiple commandments in the 10 Commandments to say that this is a bad idea. And one of the ways that they worship Asherah is the pillars. And we saw that before, that they were commanded to go in there and destroy all these pillars. But they also dedicated trees to her. And the Israelites are forbidden from following that practice and participating in the worship or dedication of things to Asherah. Deuteronomy 16:22. Neither shall you set up an idolatrous stone or image which the Lord your God hates. The Israelites are not supposed to make graven images, and this is another line here that is simply stating that. And this follows up the previous one, that they're not supposed to dedicate the trees to Asherah, they're not supposed to make the pillars of Asherah, and they're not supposed to make any other idols or any graven images to anything.